a lot of different things. It means that you really provide the families with all the information that they need, that you work in the family's natural environments, that you don't provide intervention in the lab. You work with them in the home, and you work with them engaged in activities that they are engaged in anyway, that are reinforcing. It involves that you involve the parents as active participants, where you don't just lecture style, like I do right now, talk to them, but you sort of engage them in a process where you identify challenges, you explore possibilities and answers and suggestions, and you get feedback from the parent to see what actually works for that individual child or not. In many ways, you sort of acknowledge that the parent knows the child, and as a clinician or researcher, you have certain things to offer, but eventually it's the parent's decision to see what works and what doesn't. And it also means to support the caregiver's reflection and self-evaluation. Essentially what you want to do when you do a short-term parent training, you want to give the parents the skills that he needs or she needs to evaluate her behavior, what works, what doesn't work, to notice certain child characteristics or not, or when she's losing the child or when she keeps the child. Give the parent the skills to evaluate those kind of things in the future, because the child is going to grow up and the context is going to change, the situation is going to change. But what sort of needs to stay with the parent is this ability to notice and observe the child and to develop strategies to address it and to evaluate what's working and what isn't working. So generally, parent training has sort of moved into this more sort of family-centered direction. It's actually mandated as part of early intervention to do this kind of stuff, and it's certainly recommended in many practice recommendations. So in working with Marion, we developed this short parent training intervention. It's a 12-session parent training. We do 12 home visits. Over the home visits, we go over a series of 8 topics, and I'll tell you in a second a little bit more about what the content is. We use an illustrated workbook, and we try to intersperse a range of teaching methodologies, in part to sort of allow people with different learning styles to learn differently. So we have a workbook, we have home worksheets, we use a lot of video feedback. We videotape the parent, videotape us, and we talk about the videotapes. We have sort of live moments where we both the child take turn with interacting with the child and model and show certain behaviors or give feedback while the parent is playing and so forth. Just briefly about the content, essentially the treatment has to do with trying to help parents and children coordinate their attention. So in the beginning of the intervention, these are topics 1 and 2, we talk a lot about the child's communication skills, having the parent understand that this ability to coordinate attention with another person is really hard for kids with autism. And also help the parent think about what, if they do have time to sit down with their child, what they're actually trying to do. Because obviously, there's a lot to do with the kid with autism, a lot of different areas that you can focus on, and a lot of our talking during these early sessions had to do with helping the parents sort of set priorities and figure out what's really important. If I only have 10 minutes, what do I want to focus on? So it's about priorities. And then we talk about a playtime routine, trying to help parents structure the context in a way that successful play can happen. So we're talking about the parent, or we help the parent monitor the child's gaze and interest. We help the parents try to think about, well, what do I do if my child wants to do this? Who gets to pick the toys? Who gets to pick the activities? And then later, who gets to pick what you actually want to do with those toys? So these are all questions that we try to address with ideas of our own in mind, and we certainly always sort of wanted parents to try responsive strategies. But if parents decided that wasn't working in certain situations, like, for example, if the child is playing repetitively, is it better to follow the child's lead and join what he's doing, try to expand it from there, or is it better to redirect the child? And what we would do is ask parents to try both and see what happens. And different parents came to different conclusions about what the more successful strategy is for different children. And then finally, towards the end, we talk specifically about how to talk during play, which is tough because some kids with autism don't speak, and it's not so easy to talk to a child that doesn't speak back to you. It doesn't come so natural. And we also try to make move the interaction from being just the parent being responding, but also for the parent to set up moments for the child to respond as well. So we developed this intervention. We conducted a randomized clinical trial of 70 children that we enrolled in this. They were all about 4, 5, 6 years of age, so they were not young toddlers. And then half of them participated in this intervention, which we called focused playtime, and half participated in a control condition. And then we saw the kids again after the intervention, and also we followed them for another year. I'm going to talk quickly about two aims. One was to see, does our intervention actually change parental behaviors? And the second question is, well, what if it doesn't work for everybody? Are there maybe subgroups of parents where this works for and others who it doesn't for? I'm not going to talk in details about the sample. They were all very low functioning children. Most of them didn't have language at all. The groups were all well matched. The other thing that I wanted to point out, that it was an extremely diverse sample. So here I plotted the groups against census data from Los Angeles. You can see that we had a fair representation of the population, which is really important when you think about parent training, because you want to think about, if you want to find out who does this work for, you want to make sure that you actually have a diverse group of families in the sample. And we have a lot of ethnic diversity. What we didn't have in the sample are people enough, where mothers who didn't complete high school, or mothers who had really little, or families who had very little income. So we missed sort of the lowest SES bracket, which it turns out Hunter College also misses in its student population, or a lot of colleges do. In any case, so just quickly the findings. So we found significant treatment effects. So parents who participated in the experimental group were more responsive on our measures. Those were observational measures during play. And the second finding was an interaction. That was really interesting. Once we sort of dug into the data, it turned out it was only half of the sample who really gained from this treatment. And we looked through many different variables to try to see, well, does it only work for educated moms? Does it only work for certain ethnic groups? And we didn't find anything. The only variable that really moderated the treatment effect was, and please excuse the term, it's a measure that's called maternal insightfulness measure. And what it is, it's an interview where you show the parent videotapes of their child, and you ask the parent to talk about the child's thoughts and feelings and what the child is trying to do, and relate it to experiences in everyday life. And parents who found it easier to talk about their children in this way, who sort of found it easier to tell stories and connect things about their child, those were the parents who benefited from this intervention. Parents who couldn't do that, the intervention really didn't make a difference. Interestingly, parents who were insightful to start with but didn't get the treatment deteriorated over time. They became less responsive over time. And I think that those are all sort of very intriguing findings. So just quickly to wrap it up. So we did find that our treatment actually helped parents be more responsive, or sort of realize this more responsive strategy. We found a subgroup of parents who seemed to benefit more from this treatment than others. And there are many questions about the specific nature of why it did work for some and why it didn't work for others. Especially intriguing are, to me, the mothers who were insightful to start with, didn't participate in the treatment and then became much less responsive over time. I think that it's very intriguing to talk about. I actually put up a quote here. So this was a mom who went through our treatment, and she sort of reflected on her early years of early intervention, and she said, when all of this, and this was an intense early intervention program, began, I felt like I was giving up. I was like, well, here's my son, and now you're going to help him. With you guys, and this is our intervention team coming in, it reminded me that I'm active here and I can make a big difference. And it's not all about do this, do this, do this, and here's a puff, a reward. It's not all about that, and it does not have to be all about that. So it was nice to have those tools and the reminder, okay, Mom, you cannot leave it up to them. It has to be through you too. So I think part of what this may be, that for parents who really have this reflective way of thinking about their children, if they don't have an intervention context that nurtures that, it actually is harmful. And I'll just leave it at that, and thank you all for your attention.